Hello friends, welcome to E-Pathshala. I am Shagun Sharma, Assistant Professor in Political Science in Government College for Girls, Sector 42, Chandigarh. The paper is Foreign Policy of India and the module is India-Australia Relations. India and Australia represent huge geographical entities in their respective areas. They have huge presence in their continents. However, both the countries also share certain commonalities between them, like they have parliamentary system, they have democratic setup, English language and Commonwealth brotherhood. Despite these commonalities, it took huge time to build up a warm relation between them. In this module, we are going to discuss the changing contours between both the countries, which took some time to strengthen up their relations, but now due to globalization and because after the end of the Cold War, both the countries could come together and develop good trade relations. Bilateral relations during Cold War era. During Cold War period, relations between India and Australia have not been very cordial. There have been ups and downs in their bilateral ties. However, during the period of Labour Party, their relations used to have been one of warmth as compared to the period of non-Labour Party in power in Australia. But due to absence of any traditional bilateral irritants, the main factors that shaped their relations have been their divergent perceptions on issues of defence and security. Along with their worldview, their changed outlook on these issues has led to the improvement in their relations. Common perceptions on some issues. Both countries started their relations on a healthy note. When India became free, Labour Party's response towards India created goodwill between the two. On issues like anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anti-racialism, support for the national liberation struggles, Asian outlook, etc., both shared common perceptions. Their membership of Commonwealth provided them the security and defense needs of both of them. On the question of Asian unity, both agreed to form a common platform. That is why both shared the Common Forum of Asian Conference held in New Delhi in 1947 and 1949. But this goodwill did not remain for long, as in 1949, Liberal Conservative Party came into power in Australia, which had different orientation towards this region. Thus, Indo-Australian relations, which began optimistically, did not remain so for a longer period. Divergent foreign policy outlooks. From 1949 onwards, Australia started drifting from warm ties with India. With the adoption of policy of non-alignment, India started looking towards global issues independently and without being influenced by the vision of colonial powers. Whereas Australia joined the military blocs through military pacts like ANZUS and SEATO. Their different values and imperatives cast a long shadow on the formal bilateral relationship. Later, Australia's involvement in Kashmir dispute by sending 6 military personnel every year from 1948 to 1985 as part of the United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan, and by appointing Sir Owen Dixon, a judge of the High Court of Australia, as UN mediator, led it away from India. Changed perceptions during wars. Though some silver linings were witnessed in Australia's response towards India's wars with China and Pakistan during this period, yet these were not much deep-rooted and durable. Australia supported India during Sino-Indian War in 1962, and as a result, the Royal Australian Air Force took part in air defence training exercises in the eastern and western sectors of the Sino-Indian boundary in November 1963. During 1965 India-Pakistan war also, it adopted neutral posture and welcomed the signing of Tashkent Agreement between India and Pakistan. During 1971 Indo-Pak War, Australia showed more restraint and adopted a position of neutrality during war and recognized Bangladesh on 31st January 1972. However, such support for India's point of view was largely influenced by changed American foreign policy post-war towards India. Thaw in their relations. In 1972, goodwill between India and Australia emerged after coming of Labour government to power in Australia. Convergence of interests in number of areas emerged between India and Australia. Now, the Indian Ocean was seen by both the states as an area to be free from international tensions and rivalries. Hence, Australia's view was closer to that of India's point of view of making this area as a zone of peace. Australia now condemned racial discrimination and supported India's stand on apartheid in the United Nations. Better appreciations for Indian policy of non-alignment also started. Australia's attending the meeting of NAM's Foreign Ministers Conference at Lima, Peru in 1971 as guest shows its keen desire in the activities of NAM. Role reversal. This improvement of ties between them did not proceed for longer period. India's declaration of emergency in 1975 and sacking of the Whitlam government by the Governor-General in Australia in the same year led to the disruption of emerging goodwill between them. For next 8 years, relations between India-Australia again faced rough weather. The decline in bilateral ties was marked by the changed foreign policy stance by the new government in Australia. Because of its pro-American approach, new Australian government not only reversed its policy towards Indian Ocean as a zone of peace, but also supported the establishment of American bases in this region. Despite divergent approach towards the security and defense related issues, Australia continues to appreciate India's policy of non-alignment. It condemned the apartheid policy in South Africa. Australia also supported the demand for the creation of new international economic order. Beginning of warmth in their ties. The period from 1983 till the end of Cold War again was one of warmth and understanding between the two countries, as it was an era of Labour government. During the November 1983 Commonwealth Summit, Prime Ministers of both countries held fruitful discussions on areas of mutual benefit. Despite divergent perceptions on certain issues, both supported the proposal of Indian Ocean as a zone of peace. Australia again attended NAM summit as guest and also welcomed the formulation of SAARC in South Asia. Rajiv Gandhi's visit to Australia in 1986 witnessed the emerging closeness between the two states. This visit was reciprocated by the visit of Australian Prime Minister in 1989. As a result, both countries established a joint ministerial commission in the same year. Both also coordinated efforts on the issues relating to GATT, IMF and World Bank. However, during this period, one main irritant between them was created by the sale of 50 Mirage fighter aircrafts to Pakistan by Australia in 1990. Though India took this issue with serious concern, yet it could not damage the emerging ties between the two. It only affected their relations temporarily and for a brief interval. Relations during post-Cold War era. End of Cold War and global changes. The year of 1991 was crucial in bringing about significant positive change in the India-Australia relations. The happenings during this period brought the two more closer to each other. Consequently, both India and Australia took a number of initiatives which developed goodwill between them. The end of Cold War brought out the end of ideological division of the world. As a result, substantial changes took place in the functioning and outlook among the relations between the states. Economic issues gained importance and new kind of alignment and reorientations among bilateral ties was inevitable. Now states were building their relations on more objective understanding devoid of ideological moorings and dictates of major powers. Ideological alliances were replaced by more pragmatic realization among states. Consequently, a fresh beginning among earlier distant neighbors was inevitable. India and Australia were no exception to such post-Cold War phenomenon. Implications of globalization. India and Australia were simultaneously going through a process of liberalization of their economic system. Though Australia was not a developing economy like India, yet globalization has had a similar impact on both of them. It forced to do away with trade barriers to achieve international competitiveness. Simultaneous India's Look East policy along with structural reforms combined with Australia's Look West program brought the two countries closer to each other. These new structural changes and India as second largest consumer market attracted attention of Australian government. Establishment of Australia-India Council in 1992 clearly manifested Australia's such concern. It was later reciprocated by India in 1997 through the formation of India-Australia Council. In 1994, Australian government made an in-depth study of Indian economy and found that there is huge potential for economic relations among the two countries. Accordingly, an overview of opportunities available to Australia in India and its strategy to take maximum advantage of such opportunities are analysed in Australia-India New Horizon. Besides, multilateral cooperation through their common efforts for the setup of Indian Ocean Rim Association for Regional Cooperation in 1997 enhanced their friendly ties. Their common perception toward ASEAN, ARF and WTO have also strengthened their bilateral ties. Emerging irritants. A severe setback to such emerging goodwill was noticed at the time of Australia's reaction to India's Pokhran II nuclear explosions in May 1998. Australia's strong protest of the Indian nuclear test has outstripped the reactions by the other nuclear powers. Indian government took deep offence at this oral intemperance. As protest, Australia took following measures: recalling of its High Commissioner for consultations, suspension of bilateral defence relations, recall of Australian defence advisors, recall of its defence personnel currently on training in India, sending back Indian defence personnel undergoing on training at Defence College in Australia, suspension of non-humanitarian aids, suspension of ministerial and senior official visits, etc. India too conveyed its displeasure by responding similarly to Australian government's actions. However, Australian government realized its toll soon and sent high-power delegation and visit to India to restore the goodwill. It again created better understanding of each other's concerns and interest. Though both continue to hold diverged perception or nuclear non-proliferation, yet they were successful in strengthening their convergences and reduce their divergences. Emerging convergences. Global changes and bilateral initiatives have manifested immense economic potential between India and Australia. On numerous economic issues, convergence of interest between them could be easily discerned. The emerging commonalities in areas of trade, foreign direct investment, joint ventures and multilateral corporations led to some sort of convergence in the economic ties. Trade between India and Australia was such an important area and reached at a new height during the last 2 decades. In 1991-92, total trade between them used to be Australian dollars 1,047 million, which rose to $2,834 million in 2000 and 2001. It has enhanced to nearly 3 times in 1 decade. Though in terms of total amount, both imports and exports from India to Australia have been increasing. Yet in terms of the percentage of increase over previous years, India's imports have increased substantially, but India's exports to Australia did not enhance with the same pace. In bilateral trade, India became 13th country for Australian exports. Though the percentage of Australia's export is very low at 1.6% of its total trade, yet India's share of Australia's total import is much lower than the exports. Major areas of import and export between the two countries are numerous. Principal Indian export to Australia are textile and clothing, chemicals and related products, engineering products, leather goods, gums and jewelry, processed foods, etc. Whereas India's imports from Australia consist of coal, cooking coal, mining equipments, wool, copper, base metals and ores, diamonds, wheat, software, automotive components and services, food processing equipments, etc. To institutionalize the rapidly expanding trade, both of them have established the Joint Ministerial Commission, Joint Business Council and Joint Working Group on Energy and Minerals. Both have also signed agreements regarding cooperation in science and technology for avoidance of double taxation and prevention of fiscal evasion, investment protection agreement, Thus, despite some minor problems, overall trade relations between them are running smoothly. FDI has been another area of economic cooperation between the two during the last 2 decades. The total amount during last 10 years has been rupees 67,340 million, and it ranked as the 8th largest source of foreign investment in India. However, the actual investments came from Australia has been only Australian dollars 1 billion. Consequently, its share in India's total investments received from outside world is only 2.5%. Thus, a lot more is needed by both the countries to boost up their transactions in terms of FDIs. Both countries possess huge potential for joint ventures in the changed economic scenario. Though a moderate beginning has already been made in this context, yet a lot more is still required to be done in this direction. Since 1991, a total of 407 joint ventures from Australia have been approved by the Government of India. Out of them, 266 collaborations were financial and 141 technical. In this context, companies from both the countries have to build major inroads in each other's market. For instance, Indian information technology companies have entered Australia with several major openings of their offices to service better to Australian business and organizations. They are mostly concentrated in Sydney. Important among them are NIIT, HCL, TCS, Pentasoft, Satyam, Wipro, Infosys, Aptech Worldwide, ITIL Australia Private Limited, Mahindra British Telecom Limited, Megasoft Australia Private Limited, and Zensa Technologies, etc. India's Dastur Engineering International Company also has set up its office in Sydney. The Windsor Hotel in Melbourne also belongs to Oberoi Hotels Group. Titan Watches have made its presence through its showroom in Sydney. Asian Paints have recently taken over the Pacific Paints in Queensland. Sterlite Industries has acquired 2 copper mines at Mount Loyal. Air India, ITDC, State Bank of India, and New India Assurance Company Limited have opened their offices in Australia. Australian business houses have also reciprocated this Indian gesture. ANZ Grind Lays, with its 56 branches through India, has become the largest foreign bank in India. Another major companies installed in India are RTZ CRA, National Mutual, Qantas, Cot Tea Corporations, Jord Engineers, etc. Under the science and technology agreements, both the countries are successfully collaborating in the areas of financial and educational services, environmental technologies, computer software, telecommunications, waste management, crop virus, and testing of pesticides, residues in foods, etc. Beside bilateral cooperations, both are working towards the enhancement of cooperation through multilateral forums as well. ASEAN, IOC, ARC, and WTO are such forums where both the countries are keenly associated. Given their size and potentials, they are in a position to play very vital roles to make these organizations vibrant. Despite some differences regarding the scope and working of these institutions, both are sharing the broad commonality of interests in these regional groupings. Existing divergences. Issues relating to defense and security are the main areas of differences between India and Australia. Besides, their differences on the issue of non-proliferation came to the forefront very prominently at the time of India's Pokhran II nuclear explosions in May 1998. Difference between them also exists on the role and functions of some multilateral bodies where both are members. These differences between the two can be explained as under. Though both India and Australia cherish a common goal of nuclear weapons free world, yet both followed difference of opinion over CTBT in general and India's nuclear explosion in May 1998 in particular. Australia took a very dogmatic approach to CTBT without looking into the facts that India was a joint sponsor of this treaty. India was surprised to note that Australia did not support India's contention of time-bound arrangement of disarmament under CTBT. Even the role and the pattern followed by Australia for presenting CTBT to General Assembly were also not liked by India. It was all the more shocking when Australia reacted on Pokhran II in a very irresponsible manner than that of the USA. Australia's reaction to India's nuclear explosions created an apprehension about former lack of concern for later security requirements. Among the numerous factors determining India's decision to go nuclear, the threat to its security from its neighbors, China and Pakistan, had been very prominent. The nuclear weapon capabilities of India's traditional rivals shaped its strategic posture, including its decision for nuclear explosions in May 1998. Chinese assistance in enhancing Pakistan's nuclear and missile program have sharpened the issue and created a complex triangular security relationship among the three. Australia never realized Indian compulsions in proper perspective, rather swayed by the policies of nuclear power states. Thus, Australia never developed an appropriate policy to address India's legitimate security concerns. It fails to understand that developments in India's vicinity and changed global nuclear scenario have compelled it to utilize its nuclear option. Therefore, Australian response to India's nuclear explosions created more misunderstanding between the two countries. India and Australia differ with each other in certain multilateral forums like IOC, ARC, APEC, etc., which have created irritants in their bilateral ties. Though both India and Australia took lots of pains to make IOC, ARC a reality in the post-Cold War regional cooperation, yet both differed for the incorporation of security dimension under this forum. Besides, Australia was in favor of extending its membership to Pakistan as well, while India was not inclined towards any such increase. Emerging political understanding. During the Cold War period, India and Australia suffered in their bilateral relations due to image problem and divergent political outlooks. The reciprocal exchange of political visits undertaken by the elites of both countries during the post-Cold War era to a great extent has been able to remove these misperceptions. Changed international milieu also worked as a positive input in enhancing their bilateral ties. Post-Pokhran II developments temporarily put a comma or hiccup in their relations, but this slide down has been arrested by the imaginative political initiatives taken by the political leadership in both the countries. Numerous Australia leaders visited India during 2000 to 2002 to do away with the bitterness created after its reactions of Pokhran II. Both the countries revived their official level their process of bilateral consultations. In February 2002, secretary level talks between the two countries were revived in New Delhi. Next such meeting was convened in Canberra in April 2003. There were extensive discussions and exchange of views by both the countries on issues of bilateral, regional and global concerns. Dual-track diplomacy has been given importance to break this temporary deadlock and enhancement of durable relations between them. Through Australia-India Council and Australian educational international awareness among the scholars about Australia has been created. Some voluntary academic efforts by Melbourne Group, a loose and fluid association of concerned experts in Australia, America and Asia, was formed to review the substance, meaning and implications of the nuclear situation in South Asia after May 1998. To conclude this module, we can say that the future of India-Australia relationship is dependent on reorientation of foreign policies of both the countries. It is dependent on threefold activities. First, trade. India and Australia needs huge economic cooperation in terms of bilateral trade. There is a lot of scope for improvement between both the countries. Secondly, in terms of defense, both the countries needs to reorient their relationship towards each other. In fact, Australia needs to reassess the role of India in South Asian zone, especially Indian Ocean Rim. And thirdly, in various non-traditional activities, both the countries need to come together to fight against the evils of terrorism and narcotics. Therefore, there is need for common policy formation of both the countries. Thank you.